Okay. I think I'll probably keep going. Thanks for those of you who have stuck around. Still see a bunch of people online. So I have a couple more sections broadly to talk about. These will be a little bit shorter, but still probably more time than, or more things than we have time for today. So I'm gonna speed through a few of them and we'll skip a little bit, but the last one, you can think ahead in sort of what data types are most interesting for you. There's temporal, there's network, there's multivariate, and I can cover some of the different unconventional methods. So think ahead a little bit and I'll cover in more detail the ones that you care about. Online, you can express your interest. And I'll try to sort of get the ones that are more interesting in a little bit more detail. But all the slides are available and I'll give you references. So some of what I'm going to speed through a little bit today, my student Elsie Lee Robbins, who graduated with her PhD last year, recorded a longer set of videos about how to use some of these techniques. So they're referenced in the on the GitHub website, so you can go watch in a little bit more leisurely pace some of the ideas and get a little bit more detail if you feel like you need more information. Okay, so the next section is about communicative visualization. So the two things that I want to talk about, and I'll give you different approaches, are the high level goals, thinking about sort of at a high level what it is that you're trying to do. So what is it that you're trying to communicate? And did you know you did a good job over? Okay, that's a high level goal. Then I'll talk about specific strategies that people use, so like design and annotation, that will make your communicative visualizations more effective. The problem with this first part for a long time is that the way most people approach the problem was using just purely cognitive psychological theories. So the things that I was showing you before about like bar charts are better than pie charts for this and that and the other thing, like that would be the guiding principle in deciding whether a communicative visualization was useful. But our argument in our research for the last few years has been that that is a bad way of thinking about it, that basically that leads to in one ear and out the other. So cognitive efficiency, like your ability to quickly read something and accurately, does not mean you actually got anything out of the visualization. So we started thinking about other ways of thinking about design intent. So what is it that you're trying to communicate? So the way we tend to model this is like you're defining your project goals. So what is it that you want to communicate? Done some analysis, you have some idea of what it is that you're trying to do. You design a bunch of different options. Then you need to choose between them, which is the best one for your particular case. You want to put it in a paper, a presentation, whatever it is online. How do you know like which one is likely, which set is likely reasonable? And then how do you evaluate your actual decision? Like, are you good enough as a designer to tell whether you made a good decision or not? And can we give you some tools to help you do that, either through testing or at least as a thinking instrument, okay? So the way we chose to do this, and the idea that we've been pushing, and this is how I teach visualization, is using the idea of learning objectives. So if you've ever seen a syllabus or written a syllabus, you probably have defined learning objectives for your students. What is it that you would like your student to learn, having taken the class or done the lesson or whatever it is? So these are the outcomes. We will use the same idea as outcomes for the visualization. The visualization in a communicative setting is intended to teach. You, the designer, have made the visualization. You are the teacher. There is the viewer who is the student. You are trying to have some cognitive change in your viewer after having seen the visualization. They remember some fact, they can do something, they believe something, whatever it is, the cognitive change that you would like. So you should be able to define that as a learning objective. So here's an example of a visualization. So this is marijuana usage versus possession arrests by race. So marijuana usage, you can see that black and white are relatively similar, but arrest rates are different. I might have some objectives. These are my learning objectives for you when looking at this visualization. The viewer will recall the average rate of marijuana use. I want you to basically remember that it's about 16, 17. Okay? The viewer will compare the arrest records for white and black people. So I want you to be able to remember that there is a difference in how big it is. And then I want you to perhaps attribute that to disparity in through systematic racism. Okay, these are my learning objectives for you in this particular visualization. Okay. So the way we set about to do this and help designers do this more effectively is we used a variant of Bloom's taxonomy. So if you, again, construct learning objectives ever, you may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. You're basically going to describe your learning objectives as the viewer will be able to verb to noun. So the verbs are higher level, essentially hierarchical, not always the case, but sort of different levels of cognitive difficulty. Okay, remember a single fact. Remember that unemployment in California is blah percent versus like some metacognitive thing about reasoning about your own learning at the far extreme. So being able to generate theories or whatever it is, that's at the far extreme of creation. The kinds of knowledge that I might have you learn about are factual, terminology, a specific number of fact, conceptual, like classification, there's these different groups of people, procedural, how to do something, and metacognitive. Okay, verbs and nouns, and there's an intersection between them. So I should be able to construct a learning objective that takes these two things into effect. The reason why this is useful, or the reason why we want to use this, is they basically fall into this idea of SMART goals. So maybe this is a concept you're familiar with. Learning objectives that are good should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? And I'll show how that works in a second. The main purpose of doing this is that you will have constructed for yourself in deciding what it is that you want your viewer to be able to do, constrained and specific ideas. So rather than picking like vague notions of, oh, if I put this data up on the screen, somebody will figure out something interesting about it, the viewer will understand marijuana usage and possession arrest rates by rate. This is very vague, right? Like it is not measurable, like we don't know what understand means. And so by having a language that's a little bit more specific, you're able to construct a learning objective that's a little bit more narrow and then is something you can evaluate. Again, either through your own work, like your own evaluation work, or by putting it out on the web or whatever and doing like an actual systematic evaluation. So we built a tool for this, and this again is linked from our website that will help you do this. So you can basically construct in here, like you can go in and basically say what it is that you want the person to learn, like the noun, and it will generate a bunch of potential learning objectives for you on different levels. So this will help you think through the possibilities that you might have for what it is that you're trying to achieve with your visualization. The viewer will recognize arrest rates, the viewer will briefly describe whatever, right? So it'll help you, it'll generate a bunch of these options for you. In addition to cognitive learning objectives, there are also what we call affective learning objectives. So these are things that people are often uncomfortable with when it comes to communication. So there's this perceived idea that like somehow data is magically neutral. If I'm working for a newspaper, if I'm publishing a paper, it should all be neutral, right? But the reality is in every decision that we make in design, we're trying to influence the viewer. Whether on purpose or not, we will be influencing the viewer in terms of their interpretation of the data. Okay, so there's no such thing as neutral. So what we said was, just like you have cognitive things that you might want to impact, you probably have affective things. Like you want to change people's minds about things, appraisal, attitude, or values. So the same visualization, these are not cognitive, these are affective changes I want you to have. The viewer will consider the harm of racism. The viewer will support racial justice initiatives. These are affective objectives, sort of more related to emotion rather than cognition. And it is reasonable to have these things. So some people may tell you, oh, everything should be neutral, blah, blah, blah. I will argue that's not the case. That's impossible to achieve. And so you may as well be honest about it and sort of figure out what it is that you want to have happen. Even if you're writing a paper and you're trying to convince the reader that you're right about something, that is an affective change. You can do it based on sort of logical argumentation, but ultimately you really want the person to believe what it is that they're reading about your data. Okay. There are examples. Yeah, sorry.
Feel like a very cognitive or like having trouble differentiating the cognitive and affective one. One of the cognitive ones was attributing the disparity to systemic racism versus considering the harm.
Right. So an attribution is based on the data. So like, can you make a causal sort of argument versus, right? So is there a causal linkage? Like, can you imply a causal linkage through the visualization that is then sort of the cognitive thing? Like you are able to build as a mental model, as a viewer, sort of the causal chain logically versus like a belief or a strong emotion about something. Like a value system is not really a cognitive change. Like I can argue for it through logical means, but not necessarily, right? Like I could show you, so an example of what people do is like, they could show you pictures of kids, right? Which have nothing to do with the data. That is not a logical data argument. That is a pathos argument and rhetorical, right? And that is intended to sort of play off of your emotions in such a way that you will believe that something is bad or good or whatever. Does that make sense? And most visualizations have a mix and they sometimes overlap. If I'm trying to convince you, like rhetorically again, like there's pathos, logos, and eros, right? Like there's different kinds of approaches that one might apply. And some of the thing might be, I argue for it logically, I argue for it in emotion, I argue for it based on expertise, right? So
beyond the specific data.
Right. Yeah. So this is an example. So the gun visualization, it's a very nice interactive visualization. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. So US gun killings in 2018, again, it's this kind of simulation. So the number of stolen years. And it's a visualization, there's data, but it's not intended to be readable in the sense of like you want to read actual numbers other than the two things that are sort of highlighted in the upper left and upper right. It is intended to evoke sort of an emotional response in you that makes you understand that guns have problems X, Y, and Z, right? Like this is a particular visualization with a particular non-neutral point of view about them. So they have a specific affective intent in this visualization that is different than any kind of cognitive intent. They may not care that you remember the specific numbers at all. Yeah.
The arc represent how old the person was.
Oh, I don't remember. Let me let me look it up again. I don't remember. I'm sorry. The arc was, so the arc is like the potential life and then like where they drop off. So the person was killed at 52, and that's like the gray is sort of the wasted life, stolen. Right. So everything in gray, like you can see these where they're killed. And so the arc of their life is sort of ended.
Is it visualizing like what their estimate of life expect?
Yes. It's pretty striking, right? Like it's effective, like those colors, like, yeah, it works kind of well. I think this one won an award. Okay, so just like we have a cognitive taxonomy, we have a taxonomy that we've developed for affective. So there is also an equivalent tool on our website where you can express your affective goals and it will produce potential objectives for you to consider. Okay, so these are two things that we've created that sort of help you better define your intent, right? Like why is it that you're trying to build what it is that you're building? Once you have that, it's then possible for you to make a determination of whether one visualization is better suited to your objectives than another. You can argue based on first principles, this will allow someone to recall some particular fact or information. This will allow them to better do this kind of task, whatever it is. Okay, so people often skip this step, and I guess I'm just trying to argue that like it's worth doing. Yep.
So when you're doing that more evaluating, to see they did the thing that you're asking, can they do it while doing the visualization, or is it the point that they need to do it after?
Good question. So ideally, right, like unless you want in one ear and out the other, ideally like it should remain with them. So a cognitive change should have some longer term impact. So ideally the test of this would be they can't do it. I show them the visualization, I take it away, and now they can do it. Okay. Now, if they can't do it while looking at the visualization, then you have a problem, right? So it's a precondition, right, that they should be able to do it while looking at the visualization. So the longer term cognitive impact is nice, but if you don't have sort of the immediate ability to do something when looking at the visualization, it's not going to work at all.
That's interesting though. So do you usually like prime people with like the objective first? And so that's salient then when they view the visual, because there's sometimes like many things you could pick out of them.
Right. So usually, okay, so the way we've done this, and I'll show how we so we usually build, for each learning objective, we usually build multiple choice questions. We build MCQs, so multiple choice questions and answers. So things that we will use to evaluate learning. For some people, we can ask a population of potential users of the visualization, of viewers, to answer the questions and then get some score, right? So we know the baseline community knowledge of this information. And then we can take a totally different audience if we want to do the experiment properly, and then show them the visualization, take it away, and then ask them some questions about it. So in these things, like I don't care about individual learning necessarily, right? I care about programmatic learning. That is the effect of the visualization on the entire community of people who are looking at it. If you're writing this, if you're doing a visualization for your boss, right? One person who's going to consume this is not like a great approach, right? Like you can't do this where you're doing user testing, whatever. And it may not be appropriate for every single visualization. Like I'm arguing that like there are certain cases where there's some expense that you're willing to incur to create a visualization. Like it is a thing that will live on your website for years and years and years and years. You're writing a report that's going to be read by 50,000 people, 1,000 people, whatever, critical policymakers, then this is potentially a worthwhile investment. Okay. There's ways of sort of designing these things. I'm gonna skip a little bit here, just because I'll run out of time. But I want to talk about sort of how we go next from these learning objectives to actually testing. And I mentioned that we use multiple choice questions. So this is another example of like one data set being visualized in 100 different ways. Okay, so this is like 3 different countries and sort of some statistic about them being visualized in different ways. And so we might have a choice, right? Which visualization is better? So I might have a specific learning objective, like the viewer will compare the ranks of countries over time. So we have Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Which visualization do you think is better for the viewer will compare the ranks of countries over time?
First one.
First one. Yeah, probably the first one. I think that's reasonable, right? So Sweden, so these are ranked 1, 2, 3. Sweden, you can see, has retained its top rank. Denmark has moved from 3rd to 2nd. Norway has dropped. Really hard to tell from this. You can, like the data's still there, still expressive, but it's not effective for this particular narrow task. Particular narrow task is better suited by that visualization. So if you've expressed your intent in this way, you're able to look at the 2 visualizations and make a better determination. The viewer will recall the percentile change for each country. That's a very different kind of task, a different kind of visualization objective, one for which the right display might be better. I don't know if you can read it. There's little numbers like +15, +60, +150. This visualization is better if I care about the percentile change. Let's say I care about both things. Now I'm stuck, right? Like now I have to make some determination about which I care about more. So outlining these learning objectives and ordering them in terms of priority might give you a better sense of which is better, or maybe both if you have the space. So this is the power of like being able to express your goals in this way, is that you're able to like be concrete and say, ah, this is better, or this is better, or I have to make some trade-offs in my design. Okay, but sometimes it's not sufficient to just be able to look at the learning objective. Oh, the other thing, one last thing before I get to the questions. So sometimes the learning objectives will actually allow us to modify the visualization to do better. Okay, so the viewer will recall the categories A and B together make up about 50% of the total. This is a pie chart that expresses this information, but it's not very good for this particular test. I seem in my objective to only care about categories A and B. And so an alternative approach would be this. You can still tell all the different categories from each other, but I've focused your attention through a color choice on categories A and B. And now you can easily see that categories A and B make up about or slightly above 50% of the total. Okay. So that is, again, the power of being able to express these things, is you can make design choices, not just picking between designs, but actually making design choices that are better suited. So what kind of annotations, what kind of color changes should you make in order to prioritize the information that you think your audience cares about? Okay. And even better, add some information like a title. Okay. I guess we can do this really quickly. So the pop quiz. So the viewer will recall the overall increase from 2004 to 2022. So again, 3 visualizations all showing the same thing. Which visualization do you think is best for the viewer will recall the overall increase from these 2 time periods? So the one on the left is a little bit difficult to judge the overall, right? Like you mentally have to add things in your head. So you can see for each individual one sort of their change, but overall, the sum total, the height of these things together is difficult. This is maybe a little bit better, but you still have to mentally add these things, which is challenging. This one, you get a nice summarization at the bottom. So arguably, this one is the best visualization given this objective, because you can read that specific fact, the overall value, much more easily with this visualization. It's a nice annotation. It's all put together. The brain can like sort of read that line and compare it to this line versus like trying to add up a bunch of lines together. Okay. So evaluating design. So let me end just this part with this little idea. So let's say you actually want to test this, like you want to run an experiment. So I alluded to this idea of a multiple choice question. You can run a kind of exam using Mechanical Turk or your friends and colleagues down the hall in order to figure this out. And so the nice thing about a well-designed learning objective is that you can create a well-designed question from it. So multiple choice questions are a reasonable alternative. Like they are hard to design well, but not so hard that you shouldn't be able to do it with a little bit of practice. Okay. A multiple choice question is designed so that it has a stem, that is the question part, and then a bunch of alternatives. One is correct, and then a bunch of distractors. Okay, so let's say I have this particular visualization. This is greenhouse emissions from different kinds of animals, okay, or different kinds of sources. So beef and chicken and whatever, right? So greenhouse gases emitted. Let's say what I really care about here is that you be able to distinguish between the fact that beef is 10 times worse for greenhouse emissions than chicken, okay? So a evaluative question, if that is my visualization intent, that is the goal, this is a kind of question I could ask. Beef results in blank times more greenhouse gases compared to chicken, 3, 6, and 10. Okay, I have plausible answers in there. Like there's nothing weird. And I have the correct answer in there, which is 10. Okay. A well-designed STEM and a well-designed set of questions, again, takes a little bit of practice. There are some principles, like this is the nice thing, again, about well-designed learning objectives, is we have lots and lots of understanding of how to design a good question from them. So the full information is in the STEM. You don't need anything else. There are 3 to 4 alternatives. 3 is often best. There's 1 correct answer. We do not usually have lots of extraneous information. That's annoying and nobody wants to read that when considering the environmental impacts of blah, 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 blah. We don't do that. So too much text, eliminate that. We don't want to give away the answer. The highest ratio, right? Like to you, if you read that, knowing nothing about it, having not seen the visualization, you're going to say 10 because that's the highest on there. So you're more likely to get that right. So you have to be careful about that. So avoid hints in the answer, avoid terms that are not actually in the visualization. So greenhouse gases, GHG, people don't know what that is, don't do that. Make sure there's a good alignment, right? So there's an alignment between this. I said I want you to compare the carbon footprint of beef to chicken. This is a reasonable question. Okay. Similarly, when designing alternatives, that is the distractors, you need some consistency. So half as much, 3 times as much, 10 times as much is okay, but that's not actually what the data, like the visualization doesn't show that kind of information. So the language is kind of inconsistent with what it is that you're showing. So 3, 6, and 10 is maybe more reasonable than half as much, 3 times as much, 10 times as much. Just requires like cognitive interpretation, like the difficulty in understanding the question is masking the actual answer, which is what you're trying to get to. Again, if you use weird things like 666 and tenfold, tenfold is like different, right? The fold is different, and that will hint to the person that what the answer is. So if you use ChatGPT for this, for example, we've tried this to help you generate these kinds of questions, it will often show the right answer in a slightly different way than the other ones. So you have to go in and like edit it. So if you're using ChatGPT for this, which you're welcome to try, you can take your learning objective, shove it in and say, give me a bunch of multiple choice questions for this. You have to make sure it's doing the right thing here. Ordering, like the general advice is to order these things in a logical way. So jumping around 6, 3, 10 just makes it painful for the student and like the person taking the test and isn't really helping you figure out whether they understood it or not. So usually we would say 3, 6, and 10, like we would order them in either alphabetical or whatever. Okay. So that's sort of just general advice. And again, this is a thing. So Elsie has like probably 45-minute like mini lectures on this that walk through this and walk through an actual example of her taking a visualization, constructing a learning objective, and then building like alternatives and evaluating whether they work or not. Okay, so I don't want to get too deep into that because otherwise we won't have time for anything else. Okay. We'll come back to this in a second if we have time. So that was sort of a high-level goal idea. So the high-level goals, what are you trying to communicate? So learning objectives, and then a way of evaluating through these multiple choice questions. So that was the high level. Let me talk about some other specific strategies that people have applied that are really effective for visualizations. So much of this is learned from the infographics community. So things that work well in like a newspaper setting will likely work well in communicative visualizations in your paper, right? So if you're writing an article, a report, whatever, the things that work well as infographics will help you when you're making other kinds of visualizations. So there are things that will, even with a complex visualization like this is called a connected scatter plot. There are tools that they are using in the New York Times. Let me just go to this site and see if it's working. One of them was down when I went before, but yeah, okay. So as you're walking through this, like you're getting an explanation of what's happening. So there's clear annotations, inflation's rising, later recession, and so on. There's text, and there's what's called a slideshow. And as you're moving through, it's giving you more and more details. And it's animated and it's subtle and it's interesting, right? So a lot of the things that it's calling out, like there's just a lot of data in this visualization, but they're calling things out specifically. They're walking the reader through the important points because these are the 7 things that they've decided are their learning objectives, their intents. They want you to remember certain specific things. And so they're going to call your attention to them, even with a complex data set and a visualization, one at a time. So this will connect to an idea of what it is that how much babysitting do we want to do when our viewer is looking at a visualization? So there's different kinds of extremes. When you're doing visual data analysis, you're an analyst, you're an expert. I don't want to tell you too much, right? Like I don't want to put in your brain some specific facts about the data that then you discover are incorrect. It should be totally in your control how you explore the data. I will assume that you are good at generating hypotheses, that you will not fall prey to like, statistical confounders and things like that. You will be a good analyst. At the other extreme, there are communicative settings where we may not make those assumptions. I would like to have control over your read of the data. Either because you will not understand it otherwise, or I need you to read a specific message, or I need you to prioritize a specific message in there. And so when we design visualizations, we often make some decision of how much freedom versus control we want when the person is looking at the visualization. Okay, so there's a little bit of a seesaw that we have, whether we want them to just like do analysis or whether we just want to communicate some point to them. So different approaches exist to support different kinds of balances here. So this is an example where I'm going to tell you something. Okay. What's really warming the world? If you go to this visualization, and you scroll down, you really have very little control over the story. Here's a point, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point. Right? At the end, you have a little bit of control, and we'll talk about that. But really, I'm not giving you many options. Here's what you have to do. There are other approaches that are a little bit more loose. So, for example, this one, I don't know if you've ever seen this. The New York Times like to do this for a little while, where first you draw what you think the data will be, and then it tells you what it is. So there's a high level of engagement. You're trying to engage the person as an analyst. There's a little bit more, because this works well in learning. Like if I get you to sketch it first, what do you think the line should look like? Okay, so you draw it. You think of the, like you're doing analysis based on the evidence that you have. Then it shows you the reality. Then it shows you what other people thought. All these things are intended to engage you in a certain way with the data that then will hopefully help you remember that data when you leave. Okay, so that's kind of a different extreme of like the level of engagement and analysis that I expect the reader to do. One version, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point. The other one, you do all the analysis first, and then I'll tell you some stuff. Okay. So Siegel and Hare wrote this paper that we often refer to. They basically went and analyzed a lot of different examples in the infographic and info visualization space, looking at how people design these things to be effective and what are the different types. Like, are there sort of high-level types that we can think about? So they looked at case studies and sort of observed narrative devices, like what is the message, like what is the mechanism by which people convey information? And they came up with a few different types. I'm going to talk about ordering and messaging a little bit. Interactivity I may not have as much time for. Basically, ways of breaking apart different kinds of narrative techniques. And these are things that you might consider when making a visualization. So the first one is the ordering, right? So this is like how you walk through a particular message. This is kind of a slideshow visualization. Order, point, 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 point. You're going through one at a time. The other kind at the other extreme, so is something they call the martini glass, where first they walk you through a bunch of points, and then they let you go wild, right? So they tell you a story, they give specific insights about the data, and then there's this like very interactive component. Once they've shown you what an interesting data point looks like, that lets the viewer explore and find their own things. So on the extremes, there's very reader-driven versus very author-driven. This is very reader-driven. These are very, this one in particular, like the interactive slideshow is very author-driven. Look at this, look at this, look at this, okay? So some specific examples. This is a martini glass that I showed before. So it has, at the end, a little bit of an ability to play with the data. This one is more interesting. This is one of my favorite examples in this space. So this is a visualization of the World Cup. So again, a New York Times example, it's a visualization of the World Cup and where the players are. As you scroll down, it's showing you what interesting things are. So Brazil versus Argentina. Here's a key fact that they think is interesting. These are the relationships between the players and where they play and which teams and which countries they come from. They're highlighting a specific aspect. Then the European connection. They're showing you something about Europe. Then something about the rest of the world. So each of these is showing you some specific interesting statistical facts that they think are important and representative of something else. And then they let you go nuts. Now you can have the option of doing whatever you want with the visualization, and you can start having your own theories and start doing all kinds of stuff. So they've shown you what interesting patterns are. That's the martini stem. It's very limited and constrained in what you can do. And then it opens up and you can do whatever you want. So this is an example of the martini glass structure. This is an example of, it's, I don't know what to call it. It's kind of like a zoom in, zoom out view. You have a central thing and the person focuses on specific regions and then zooms out. It's a little bit more in your control because you can pick into which area you zoom out. It's not like a slideshow, but it's still highly constrained. You only have a few things you can pick on this particular display. So let me see if I have a video of it. High level view and details, like you can zoom into details as you care about them. So the details that you care about, you can get more information about. The ones you don't, you sort of skip. So that's kind of the middle ground in control. Does that make sense? The viewer has limited control. The messaging is still constrained by the designer of the visualization. And finally, this interactive slideshow, which has no control, right? Like the user can only go slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, slide 4. So the message is very constrained. Okay, the point of all this is that you have different abilities, like when designing a visualization, especially an interactive one, in leading your viewer into a specific place. So depending on the kind of cognitive change that you want to have, you might opt for different variants of these things. If all you want them to do is recall specific facts, maybe this is fine. Like you can show them fact 1, fact 2, fact 3, fact 4, and you're happy and you're done. They've seen those facts. That's it. You don't care for them to like find other interesting things in the data. If you want them to learn a specific pattern in the data, like this is an interesting relationship between soccer players, there's a bunch of these that exist in the data, go see if you can find them. That's a little bit of a higher level cognitive objective, which is maybe more suited to like that martini glass kind of structure. Okay, so the objective determines sort of the narrative strategy that you would apply. Okay. So this is the tendency for the last few years has been to adopt ideas from the writing and narrative community in the design of visualization. So this requires skills familiar to those like movie directors beyond technical experts' knowledge. So read a book on like how movie designers do things. If I have a minute, I can show an example. The kind of narrative approaches that someone does in authoring a book or cinematography is really useful for understanding the kinds of strategies that you might apply in building a visualization that somebody will use and learn from. Okay, there are, okay, so this is an example of just from the movie idea. You have visual narrative tactics, right? So we know how to call people's attention to things. When you look at this visualization, you're going to read it in a certain way and your eye will be drawn to specific things. The first thing your eye will be drawn to, because you tend to read from the upper left, and because this player is telling you what to look at, is this number 755. You will then tend to follow your eye down because there's this nice structure of a human, and you will follow the eye down, and then you will look at this, and your eye will go this way because that's where the line is drawing your eye. So the layout here is causing you to read the visual, the infographic, in a certain order. They're applying tricks of narration and structure and layout that apply in like book design or movie design or whatever to get you to look at specific things in the visualization. So very simple tricks can get people, even with non-interactive visualizations, like a static image, to basically read things in a certain order. So this is a trick that is applied through good graphic design and narration. There's also transition guides. So this is a different example where like I'm telling you where to click next. So this is much more obvious in an interactive setting. Just click, 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 click. Like you know to follow the numbers at the bottom. So maybe it's not, maybe you can't take this visualization and sort of lay it out in this nice way, but you can still get people to read it in a certain order. Okay. Do I want to do this? Maybe we'll come back to this if we have time. It's linked in the GitHub. This is a analysis of different kinds of cinematography techniques by different kinds of film editors. They talk about two specific kinds. I'm not going to make you watch the 5 minutes, but it's a cool example. There's either a version where like the storytelling is done through quick cuts, right? Like the filmmaker takes has 5 cameras filming their star and then like cuts between them dynamically, like quickly, cut, 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 right? Like they're telling the person where to look, cut, 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 cut. The other example that they show from this Japanese filmmaker is like one where like he very subtly, like he only uses one camera and very subtly uses tricks like this to get you to look at certain things. So where the character's eyes are looking, where the light is. So there's lots of little tricks with one camera that can achieve the same kind of outcome. So again, I don't want to go through the video. It's like probably 5 minutes, which is maybe not the best use of our time, but I'll leave it up as an idea because I think this kind of staging, this idea of like how to narrate your visualization, I think is a very interesting one that applies in design. So this bottom one is very like cut, 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 cut. Let me walk you through this. This top one is very like ensemble, like where the eyes are looking, you're sort of following. Okay, I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this. It's a very difficult concept, I apologize. But hopefully you get enough of a sense that you sort of see the difference between these. And I do encourage you to watch this video, especially if you care about movies, because it's interesting. Okay. A couple of other tricks that people use in communication design. One is rhetorical tricks. So this can call your attention in lots of interesting ways. So Jessica Hullman, who's a professor at Northwestern, was actually one of my PhD students, and Nick Diakopoulos, who's also Northwestern, came up with this idea of visualization rhetoric. So what are the rhetorical techniques being used in the visualization to get you to remember or believe or whatever, something? So Nigel Holmes has this very famous example. He's got a bunch of these. It's a visualization of monstrous costs, okay? It's a very simple bar chart. There's nothing complicated in it. It has what Tufte would call chart junk, but which is actually a really useful rhetorical trick. I want you to believe and understand that this is monstrous. It is very bad. So what better way to convey this idea of a very bad thing happening than by designing a monster around it? The teeth are sort of the bars. So this is a rhetorical trick that I can apply in the design of the visualization in order to get you to engage with the data and understand it in a certain way. And I pretty much guarantee that when I take this away, and in a few weeks I will ask you, like, what is a visualization that you remember from this talk? This may very well be one of them. It's very simple, very clear. And when I say monstrous cost, you'll probably be able to draw these bars. Yep. Yeah. Well, the monstrous version of it, yes, right? So there's clearly like an interpretation of this as being bad. So yes, so in that sense, yes, there's an affective intent. There's also a cognitive intent, perhaps, so just to remember that like in 1982, we're like so far beyond like where we were in 1970. So like there might be some factual recall that I would like to have with this, but yeah, like this is like, oh yeah. Okay, so this is an example that I showed before. This is the Republican version. This is the Democratic version. The full title is not on here. It's called Don't Fuck with Graphic Designers. It's calm, it's elegant, it's pastel, it's clean, it's everything that is not, right? If I was trying to convince you that Obamacare was great, this is much better than that one, right? So rhetorical trick, just in design. Same data, roughly, so much more elegant and peaceful and blah, right?
I would also alter that because the Republican plan shows you all the background stuff,
Sure.
most of which you don't care about.
Yeah.
And the effects are uncertain. So what I would try to do is the experience for you. Because you're hoping maybe before after experience for you.
Mhm.
There's a comment when I was commuting student to Eastern. At one point, I'm sitting in the parking lot and I visualized all the driving I would have to do on this route for the next few years. Almost like couldn't drive.
Yeah.
So whether you present all the stuff once or not.
Yep. So that's an interesting point. There's an approach called personalization, which is now used often. So the New York Times, you may not have noticed this. Sometimes when you go to the New York Times now or some other media, the article will actually change based on your location. So if you're coming from Ann Arbor, you will get a slightly different article than if you're coming from, I don't know, Colorado, Boulder, right? The visualizations will change to focus on Michigan or Ann Arbor or Washtenaw County based on where you were coming from. So they know based on geolocation from your browser where you are, and the visualization will change to emphasize facts. The article text will change and the visualizations will change, and that increases engagement. So yes, you could certainly like get people to believe or like be more interested in or whatever your intent is by using a trick like personalization. Okay. So I talked about this before. This is a considering your audience thing. So like there's a difference between, yeah, I mentioned this before, like a New York Times style visualization versus like USA Today style visualization. There's nothing wrong with either of these. I'm not belittling like either design or either audience. They have very different goals, very different kinds of time tolerance and what they're willing to engage with. This requires a lot of reading and a lot of understanding. This is fairly simple, like brings your eye to the bottom of the, the bottom of the page. If you see USA Today, it's like the bottom corner. It's colorful. There's not a lot of data here, which is fine. Brings your eye to it, like you read it, you're done, you're good. Okay, so again, this is like the choices that you make, the rhetorical choices, like whether you're using like what tough equals chart junk versus like these kinds of complex designs as rhetorical approaches may be dependent on your audience. Okay. One last thing for this, which is that annotations and communicative visualizations are critical. Okay, so being good at adding annotations, I think, is like one of the most undervalued things. My students tend to what they tend to do when they create visualizations, though they're in a data science class, they create these visualizations and they have a memory of like the process that they took to arrive at some conclusion, right? They like remember, I understood the data to be this way. I saw this other piece of data before this. They know something very deep about the data. And then they make the incorrect assumption. And it's not just students, other people do this too. They make the incorrect assumption about the reader or the viewer, about what the reader or the viewer knows. And so they just throw this visualization on the page and there's no annotations, there's nothing on there. And so I have to sit there and puzzle through what it is that they're trying to tell me. And I could usually do it, but it takes me a lot of work. It would be far, far more helpful if they spent the time adding a layer of annotation on those visualizations, even the ones that were perfectly reasonable for them as analysts, to make it easier for me as the reader. And so this is a sort of very undervalued thing in a lot of visualization work that I see. So even in very nice reports, people just throw visualizations. Maybe they have a title, maybe there's a little bit of a caption, but you have to do a lot of work in order to figure out what the whole thing is about. What's interesting about this? Just tell me. Okay. So being good at making annotations, I think, is really important. So just pulling out like key points, throwing arrows onto this. And this is the thing that I may not have time to get through today, but my lesson to the students, and this is my PhD students and also my master students and my undergrads, you make a visualization in ggplot, you make a visualization in Excel, you make a visualization, whatever. You have to load it into something like Illustrator or Figma or whatever it is, and add an additional layer of information. So add these things to them so that I can read them. Yep.
What are your thoughts? Because this is exactly my struggle, right? Like on a smartphone, mobile, right? And where these are personalized to everyone, you don't know what they're going to be necessarily because you don't know what people's data are ahead of time, right?
Right.
What are your thoughts about annotations, not on the visualization, but maybe like under the visualization?
So that's totally fine. So adding good captions is certainly better than nothing, right? So if you can't point to like, hey, look at this point, that's interesting, like at least in the captions is totally useful. There are libraries now that will actually let you do dynamic annotation. So even if it's like a visualization that has changed, you can figure out where there's interesting things. So we've done research projects actually on like figuring out where things need explanation. So the behavior of the time series is such that like the human eye is going to be drawn to this peak, and I should tell them why this peak is there. So there is a reason. So we do some calculation and like build textual annotations automatically to sort of help. The other thing that people sometimes do now is in the text, if you mouse over the text, it will at least highlight the point. So you can create a binding between the data point or the range and the text. So again, moving over like the text part, like in the reading or some note at the bottom, will highlight what it is that you're talking about. So that's sort of an intermediate point. Okay. So if I have time, I know I promised I would try to do this Illustrator demo, but I'll see if we get to it. It's actually not that much work. Like I was going to show like 3 minutes of me just downloading a data set from RAWGraphs, which is like a web-based visualization tool. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. I'll just show you very quickly like how I sort of think about this, and then maybe that will be useful. So RAWGraphs is a web-based tool for building visualizations. There's a couple that I like. RAWGraphs is free. There's also Flourish and Data Wrapper, which I'll give you pointers to, that are slightly more expensive. They do a better job. Data Wrapper in particular is used by professionals, but they cost money. RAWGraphs is free. So you can upload your data set into here, just drag and drop it, or do one of their samples, which is what I'm going to do. Let's do... I don't know. Let's do the happiness index. Okay, so this is like a standard data set that they have. You can modify this if you want. You can upload a CSV file. What's cool about this is you go down here, way beyond the data, and they'll give you a bunch of visualization options. So all these like different techniques that you might want to use, a bar chart, stacked bar chart, arc diagram, chart, whatever, you can just pick. So you can pick from here. It will tell you what it's good for, correlations and proportions. You scroll down, and this is where you can start dragging the items that you want into here. So this is like Tableau if you've used it. If not, it's fine. You're basically just like the x-axis, the y-axis. So what do you want these things to be? So you can do like the x-axis is year. So I'll drag this here. The y-axis maybe is generosity. And it's telling you like there's a little number here, so it accepts numbers. And then maybe, I don't know, perception of corruption is size. So underneath here, it's like doing various things, right? It's like, it's changing the display. This one might not be that interesting. Maybe I want color to be positive affect. It's not a great visualization. I have no idea. Like I was just sort of randomly picking features. Not a lot of useful information happening here, but maybe I could do like, I can switch to like a box plot or something. This works. So maybe the y-axis is country. Oops, no. Can't map. What did I do wrong? Y-axis. Oh, there's only one value for each. Do box plots. That's slightly better. Okay. This is the visualization it produces. So clearly this is not great. Now you can modify a few different things about it. Like you can modify the high level colors and whatever, but this is not something I would be willing to put online, right? Like, or in a report. It's too messy. I want rounding, I want other things. So what I will often do, I don't know if I can round in this, but so we can show the legend or not. I don't know. So you can modify, again, like properties, like how much space there is between them. For the charts, the width, the diameter. The annoying thing about this one is like I can't, like some of them you can actually cause it to rotate. So I'd want this as a horizontal chart. So this is, again, something I would want to do manually by going to like Illustrator. So at the bottom here, what I would usually do is download this, then go to Illustrator, pick the visualization. Okay. And then I'd start editing, right? So for example, I'd break this apart. So I'd ungroup all these things. So when you load things into Illustrator, like it treats all these things are objects, like they're graphical objects, but they're all grouped as one. So the first thing I do is just ungroup them. And then I just start modifying, right? So like this, like maybe I don't love these colors. So I can select all these things that I want to change. Like I don't love these colors. They're not consistent with whatever style guide I have. I can just go through and like modify them if I want, right? So I can go in here and like say I don't want, like I want whatever color. These fonts are not consistent with the University of Michigan font guide. Like there's a different kind of font guide that we use. So this is, I think it's called, starts with an A. Atkinson Hyperlegible is what the university tells us to use. So there's a website, I've also linked to it from the GitHub page that tells you which colors you're supposed to use and which fonts you're supposed to use. So when my students do this, I have them either find a style guide or produce a style guide. So the style guide tells us if you're not in Michigan, your school or your institution probably has one of these. They basically have a document that tells you which colors and which fonts If they're good, which the Michigan one is, they will also have accessibility guidelines. So they'll tell you which colors to use to make things accessible. So there's a visualization thing down here somewhere. So accessible data visualizations, they tell you which colors are consistent with their style guide that are still color safe, like for people who are colorblind. And you go and you pick these things. So it tells you like the hex value. So back in Illustrator, what I'm doing is I will often just go through and manually change these things. So like, you know, if I have to, like if I didn't round them like through some other way, I'd probably just manually do it. In this case, this is probably too much data for me to do, so I probably would have fixed this particular problem in my data set. But again, all these things that are a little bit problematic, I'd come in here and fix, like even rotating this thing, I might just select and do like a rotating to get horizontal if I felt that was better, so that I could get the labels to be more readable. So this is the power of this. And within this, now you can start adding annotations. So you can add little boxes if you wanted, like if you wanted to call the attention to, this is interesting, right? Like you can have that in the display. Where are my tools? Right. So I just made the fill nothing, and then I'm just going to make a line, a black line, and then I can add an arrowhead if I wanted, like this. Right. So it's really not a lot of work. Like there's just not a lot of tools that you actually need to use. I felt bad that I was gonna like tell you all this stuff about Illustrator. There's a lot of features, but really like the only thing you really need to know is that you can ungroup stuff and then you can start moving around and editing. So just because like ggplot or whatever tool you're using produced something doesn't mean you have to settle for it. And I would encourage you actually to do this because even if you see enough visualizations, like you tend to be able to pick up on like, oh, Excel did this or ggplot did this or Tableau did this. And it feels a little bit unprofessional when someone does not do the extra work to like get it into some other style format. So that little bit of extra work in changing the colors and the fonts and the layout just a little bit and making it embellished in a certain way adds to the feeling of completeness, which makes it feel more professional. Like as if you didn't just like do whatever ggplot said. Okay. So I can give you more resources for this particular part too, but it's just a thing that's available if you want. Although I would very strongly encourage you to think about this. So what are the other kinds of annotations? So this is specific kinds. So I created this kind of annotation. There are other little subtle like annotations like color, for example, that highlight ranges. So this particular thing was like, you know, there's like a couple of periods when like the values of rainfall were really, really high. And so this little annotation, just this coloring, brings your attention to it, right? It says, pay attention to these things. These two big jumps in the data are very important. It's very subtle. The data was already there. Like you could argue, oh, why am I doing this? But the reader doesn't know where to look. Like you just want to draw their eye to the right spots. This is another nice example. Like they're kind of cute. They're sort of handwritten annotations, but you can see where they're drawing your eye to certain things. It's like a small multiples visualization. So there's a lot of stuff in here, but this is telling you both how to read it, overall performance versus expectations, one season, and also where like certain players are that are interesting. It's really subtle. It's really small. It probably took 10 minutes of extra work, but this makes it so much more readable. Other annotations. So sometimes visualizations, especially if you use sort of non-standard ones, like this is a kind of weird heat map of in England where people co-shop. So if they shop in one supermarket, which is the other supermarket they shop at, it's a little bit of a hard thing to understand. Like people don't necessarily know what a heat map is, haven't seen it. And so there's like this kind of very strong thing to read. Like it says, 1, read this, 2, read this. And then there's an example, right? Like they're pulling out a specific case in the annotation that says, hey, this is what this means. So again, a very small set of annotations. It's adding 1, 2, 3 little things to the display. They manually had to do this, but it makes it so much more readable, so much more legible. Okay. Any questions about this? Yeah, sorry. This one's terrible. This one?
I think this one, well, actually, let me just read it. In terms of adding annotation, can you share your opinion about fonts? I see people using regular fonts, e.g. Arial, but it is also common to use some handwritten like fonts. Can you comment on that?
It's a style. So I don't, the sketchiness of a handwritten font conveys incompleteness and sort of not part of the final design. So, right, like this person may be like, this is interesting to me personally. Like that's the feeling that I get when I read things in a handwritten font, is like somebody manually, like as if you had opened up a book and somebody intimate. Yeah, okay. But somebody had like read through like a book and marked it up. Like I see their handwritten notes on it. It feels like a very personal thing that somebody else found interesting. But you know, a little smiley face on here, if you can see that. But like these things it feels much less formal. And so they might be treated more as like examples of other things you might find. Like, this is not the thing that I actually care for you to learn from here, but it is an example of something interesting. Feeling of unfinished. Okay. So we have 20 minutes left, I think, right? About. I want to leave this a little bit open to what you guys want to hear about. So I have techniques that are unconventional in a bunch of different ways. So temporal, multivariate data sets, networks, hierarchies. Does anyone have like a strong opinion of something they want to learn more about? Like, is something useful to them? Yeah.
Do you have anything on flowcharts?
Flow charts. No.
The other day, I was just like, this is so ugly. It's not conveying the information I want.
Flowcharts are hard. I can point you at specific tools. I don't have unconventional approaches.
Yeah.
So, so most flowcharts are, yeah, very sort of standard. There are layout techniques that I could probably point you at, but they, yeah, I don't know of a flowchart that's like interesting and useful. Sometimes the only other thing I might suggest is like if you have the ability to do interactivity and like walk people through like one step at a time, or have them click and sort of have it highlight a path through the flow chart, it might be better. But yeah, that one's hard. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know which one is that. Just trying to think, like, if you're trying to like essentially track like 1,000 things, and is there any like unconventional approach for like looking at like those type of things that you can kind of drill down or anything like that? Like,
So they're not unconventional, but they are sort of the philosophy in information visualization, the mantra, so to speak, is that you have overview first, zoom, and details on demand. So the way most good visualization software is designed, and if it's not, you should look for maybe alternatives, is they will often show you a high-level summary of everything. So if you have a lot of data, they'll often give you, again, a high-level scatter plot or whatever it is, and they might summarize it. So they might have like points aggregated, so maybe like a hex plot. So points sort of in the same coordinate space, like sit as like a little hex chunk in the scatter plot. Let me see if I can pull one of these up. Like this. So there's hexagonal binning, which works quite well, that you can zoom in. So in the interactive software will give you high level zoom in, and you're getting like a sense of where the data is. So there's additional distributional information at the sides. But yeah, that's sort of common for high level summaries where you have a lot of data. Often when you have a million data points or a billion data points, like it's sort of, what can you read from that? maybe this is a hard question. Like maybe I should show you some of these examples and you can tell me when to stop. How about that? So visualizing time is a particularly interesting and hard problem. This is a resource that I'll link you to. This is many, many different ways of visualizing time. So the standard one is this one, right? Time series, yay. This is visualization of standard water usage in Canada versus water usage in Canada when the Olympics were on and the Canadians were playing and doing well and not wanting to go to the bathroom. Okay, so you can see sort of how much flushing there was in Edmonton or wherever this was. Standard time series, comparative, right? Like there's a standard line, there's sort of the exceptional line. You can tell a story, there's interesting annotations, standard time series. There's alternatives like this one, which are common these days. How many of you know what this is? It's like a big, it's actually like I forget what they called it. Shoot, they had a name for it. There was like a hashtag that was going around yesterday because it was like the day of people sharing these. This is climate change, right? So time versus like the heating, the extreme temperatures. So there's a few examples of this that are floating around the web today. But again, time, people have knitted this, like find like big fabrics that describe this. The other thing that are sort of, we talked about, or I showed examples of, but maybe you didn't catch, that are interesting for time are connected scatter plots. So sometimes when we have scatter plot data, we want to be able to imply some ordering on it. So this is an example of a visualization that is actually a little bit challenging for people to read. So it goes against what a standard scatter plot kind of looks like because there's this extra connection. It's not a time series. So these lines sort of reflect two different values over time. So you can follow the history of these two different values. So this is miles driven, gas prices, and they're over time and your eye sort of follows it. So there is a linear story, but sometimes it goes back to time. It turns out, so people have done experiments with this. So there's a guy named Steve Harose, who's a researcher, I forget where, that actually did experiments on this, and he demonstrated that you can train people to read these things well. So it takes some effort. This is an example of like, maybe you don't want to do this once and never use it again because people are going to be mad at you, but as an example of where like they can learn to map between a visualization like this, visualization. So this is showing the same data. So over time in two different data sets, it's showing the correlation. The nice thing about connected scatter plots is that certain patterns become learnable. So if you have a pattern that looks like this, you learn that it's a two-time series with a lag. That's what this means, okay? This kind of step function looks like this in the correlation. So this is an example where like a summary like this connected scatter plot summary in patterns that are sort of repeated and common becomes much easier to parse than those things. So there's a few other examples like this. This is called a tornado plot. You've seen this before. It's not that common. It's showing increases and decreases of something. It happens to be COVID deaths, I'm sorry. Sort of countries. And so again, it's a little bit hard to parse, but like there's Martin Wattenberg has a nice website where you can plot the data. This is what it looks like. And again, this is not useful for every kind of task. This is again like one of these like really weird, strange visualizations that is good for narrow kinds of things. This particular pattern, this oscillation with an upward trend, looks like this. So if you ever see this, you know your data looks like that. Okay. And what that allows you to potentially do is if you have different time series, you can compare them. So you can see sort of where there are similarities and differences in these different countries in terms of like sort of oscillations. Yep.
One audience request.
Yeah.
What's a way to show the relationship with multivariate / multi-domain data beyond a heat map?
Multivariate, multi-domain. So, okay. So small multiples, I assume people are familiar with. so small multiples are really like nice and effective. Like if you have multivariate, multi-domain, like you can sort of plot out little ones. This is like a drought. Okay. The nice thing about this, it uses something called pre-attentive processing. So the human brain is like really good at detecting outliers and patterns. So when you look at a visualization like this, your brain like instantly goes to like weird outliers. So you can see where there's like, you know, everything is orange or everything is gray. You can also see trends usually because this is over time. So where there's sort of a denseness of the scene. So this is an example. And the reason this works is again, pre-attentive processing. So this is easy, like the different guys, really obvious versus, you know, that. So where's Waldo? Okay. So the other thing that people use, I don't know, so multivariate data sets. So I don't know how many people are familiar with parallel coordinates. Anybody? One? I don't know, online, are you familiar with parallel coordinates? Okay, so the way parallel coordinates are used are you draw axes with values. It could be quantitative, it could be ordinal, it could be nominal. It doesn't really matter. You draw them as a dimension that goes from 0 to 10, okay? And you order them in a specific order. So let's say these are different tests that my students have taken. So there's tests 1 through 5, and they've taken them. And then I have different students who have taken them. So student D1 has achieved these scores. And so the line representing student D1 starts at 7, goes to 3, and so on. All right, so for that particular student, I can read this particular distribution of data. I can see how well they've done, let's say, over time. But these things can be reordered as necessary. So that exists. And then I can draw the other students. So as you might imagine, this becomes like a really messy, hard to use kind of thing if you have lots and lots of data. The trick with parallel coordinates is that they often implement interactivity where you can select the region that you care about. So you say, in this particular example, I only want students that performed well on test 2. So when you select this, those lines will become visible and the other one will sort of vanish. Okay, maybe it'll be grayed out or whatever. And you can often, in these visualizations, select multiple things. So I only want students who performed well on test 1 and test 2. So this is an example using like the standard car data set that we have. So we have year, we have miles per hour, miles per gallon, weight, power, displacement, cylinders, and so forth. And what this is doing is like the person is selecting ranges of values that they care about. And this will highlight sort of those cars that match. You can mouse over the specific ones to get more information. So this is a multivariate, multidimensional visualization approach. This has become very popular in the machine learning community. So if you use a system like weights and biases for training a model, there's 50 different parameters that you can train your model on, right? Like you can vary temperature, you can vary data set size, split, whatever. And so they'll run a bunch of different tests and they'll visualize each of the different experimental runs, including performance on one of these dimensions. And then they will highlight things that they care about. So let's say they want to take parameters that work well with very few cycles, like it doesn't take very long to train. So they can select time, like minimum time, and then they can select high performance, and then they can find the parameters that generate that as good values. So that's like an approach that people have sort of become more used to these days. So you'll see, I'm guessing this kind of visualization approach will become very common. It's actually a very old technique, but sort of lost favor for a while, but is kind of now one that's really interesting. Does that answer sort of?
I think so.
There's a couple of other examples. So I give references to like where to find these tools, like if you want on this. So there's a few sort of open source versions of this that you can load your data set into. And there's a couple of other examples. One is or dust and magnets and lineup that I would give us other sort of potential tools.
This is the main lineup interface.
Oh,
Let's
playing my
assume
thing.
we're a prospective student.
That's me, sorry. Yeah, this is like a tool where it's like kind of like an Excel spreadsheet with visualizations and you can sort of combine different factors that you care about. This is like, they're trying to rank universities. And so they have the universities and they sort of different
Insert
properties of the
column
universities, and
with
they can
double-clicking
combine
its
them in
header.
interesting ways so that you can find
To reproduce the
the top
exact
university
weights
and
used for the
whatever.
published ranking, we enter them
Mhm.
directly.
Whatever. Okay, I will just tell you in the few minutes I have left, I will tell you what else is available in the slides. Let's do that so that you get a sense of like sort of the space of possibilities for you at the very least. So the one that I like, so there's many ways of visualizing sets. Sets and set overlaps is a very hard problem. Venn diagrams, very simple, show you overlap. If you have more sets and more complex relationships, you go into Euler diagrams. So that you're unhappy. This is a package from R that does this. A technique that I like is one called upset. So this is a tool that is available in R and pretty much every package these days. This allows you to visualize the overlapping relationships between sets. So this is different movies or different novels, crime, thriller, fantasy, comedy, drama. Each of these rows corresponds to a different type. If there is an edge between them, that means it's an overlap. So this particular thing is crime that is also a thriller. And there are 25 books or movies that correspond to this. If there's 3 of them, this is crime, that's also a thriller, that's also a drama, and there's only 6 of these or whatever. Yeah.
I've seen that when I encountered this, it was used for missing data.
Yes, you can do that too.
You can look at the patterns of missing data with a limitation that it got really complicated really quickly.
Yeah, so you can do the opposite, right? So the grays become things that are not there, right? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and this is exponential, right? So there's n squared combinations of these things. But this is a really useful approach and it's one that's available, like readily available. So some of these, like you have to find sort of custom tools and run your own thing and whatever. This is like, there's a library that's built into most tools now. So this is an example that's really easy to use. For hierarchies and networks, so I'll give you some examples. There's some examples in documents. So tree maps are kind of like the weirdest one that you might have seen, but are uncommon. So sort of displaying it. So there's a walkthrough in the slides. And this is, again, something that most packages have these days. So sort of describe like total sales and then like splitting them up by, you know, fruit versus meat versus dairy, and then like splitting them up again. And so you basically capture a lot of information in a very dense way. Now, perceptually, the problem with visualizations like this is that it's very hard for you to determine area. So we talked about this before. So this is like one of these like interesting limitations about approaches like this. So you being able to tell me how much bigger this is than this is very hard for you. That's why we often add colors or something like that to the visualization, because especially in like non-standard shapes, like if they're not squares, like they're weird sort of rectangles, that problem becomes really hard. So most programs that do this well will try to maintain square shapes as much as possible, but even there's perceptual limitation. So I bring this one up in part because like it's a really nice and useful tool, but this is one where like having some knowledge of how perception works would tell you that like it's either good or bad for the data set that you have. So yes, it's useful for a particular set of approaches, but with the recognition that certain readers and viewers will interpret the wrong thing from the data. Okay. I show examples of networks, and similarly, there's like, you know, databases of like different kinds of network visualization techniques. And the last one, which is sort of near and dear to my heart because I do a bunch of work in this space, is uncertainty visualization. So uncertainty visualization is hard. So like if you have any data where there's like error bars or box plots or whatever, right? Like any kind of uncertainty around the data becomes challenging. And so there's been different approaches, like you draw these envelopes, you draw distributions, whatever it is. So the one technique that I wanted to introduce you to that maybe if you haven't seen is something that, again, Jessica Hullman and a couple of us worked on a long time ago called HOPS. And there's many versions of this now, hypothetical outcome plots. And there's packages in R to do this. The idea is that if you have a visualization like this, right, where there's sort of error bars or margins or whatever, it's very hard for you to determine things like, are these things correlated? How often? Like, does it really mean that like solute B is better than solute A, whatever? And so what we did was an experiment where we have animations. And by using simulated draws, like using bootstrapping, we pull data from the distributions and we visually animate these things. And we let a person sit there and watch. And it turns out that when we do this, people are really good at telling us whether solute B is better than solute A, and if they're correlated and things like that. They're much more accurate in their understanding and ability to read when this is happening versus that. Okay, so with training, of course, maybe you're good at this, but even trained people tend to not be very good at this. Like telling you whether this is statistically different or interesting is very hard. Doing this, people tend to do quite well in. So there's a bunch of packages now. This is just a demonstration of like, when these things are uncorrelated, like they flip, and when they're correlated, they're always like this. So these are the different frames. So again, I bring this up just because I think there's a lot of like interesting packages these days for other kinds of visualizations. Like people have used this for time series. So Klaus Wilke developed a package in R for doing this for time kind of scatter plot data. So it calculates a bunch of draws and does animations to show you possible outcomes. So yeah, I'll end with that. And I'll give you references to all these things. I apologize, it's just a lot. But hopefully this gives you a sense of some other possible options in the world other than like sort of your standard visualizations, but also hopefully gives you a set of tools to determine whether that's appropriate for your particular task. So yes, you can do this, but maybe this is better for like your audience or whatever their needs are. So hopefully you can apply some of these first principles like to make decisions about whether these ideas are useful or not, and whether to apply them or not. But let me end with that. I can stick around for a few more minutes and answer questions. Yeah, thank you.
Just one more note from me. I will be posting a link to the video either later today or latest tomorrow. So this has been recorded, of course, and we'll put that video online and I'll send that link out as well as any other material that we gathered today. So thanks again, everybody. And yeah, appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything I didn't answer for people in the room? You're okay. You've had enough of me for after 4 hours.
That was a lot.